All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's get straight into it.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Monday. We have a lot to talk about tonight, lots to get into. Big show. Absolutely huge show. Big news. Featured story, we're talking about an end to the war in Iran. Seems like it's finally over. We've been covering this war for over 100 days at this point. Realistically, it's been something like 2.5 years in the making ever since October 7th. And
boy, it feels like 2.5 years have passed since the start of the war. It just feels like quite the slog that's been dragging on.
The end of 2023. And now, by all appearances, according to Pakistan, the United States, and Iran, it seems that the war is about to come to an end on Friday. I'm sure you've heard the news. There is a memorandum of understanding which was officially signed yesterday, sometime this weekend. I'm not sure exactly when. There will be a formal signing ceremony, although it is symbolic, which will take place on Friday. And then this new agreement will be in effect and end hostilities potentially permanently between the United States and Iran.
I mean, it's a good thing ultimately, yeah. Like, we want the war to end, but make no mistake about it, this is a strategic defeat for the United States. This is a loss. We're going to get into all the specifics, but unambiguously, this is a defeat for the United States. It's a bad thing.
So tonight we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the details of the agreement. We're going to talk about what's in it or what is rumored or suspected to be in it. Because, of course, one of the big problems, which is already emerging, is that we don't even know what's in the deal. It was announced yesterday that there is a memorandum of understanding. This is something like a framework for a short-term truce. And although all sides through these indirect negotiations and the mediators are saying that we have a deal and there is agreement, we have not actually seen what's in it. We don't know with any specificity what is covered and what each side agreed to.
What we do know for sure is that and Netanyahu are saying that they are going to continue their war in Lebanon, that they are going to have troops there occupying it still. So we're going to dive into that. It's not looking good.
And so because of that, it's hard actually to know what is even going on. And this raises some questions about whether there even is an agreement at all. We know there is a memorandum of understanding. We know there is something resembling a framework for an agreement. But already 24 hours has passed. There are some discrepancies that have emerged between the two sides in their understanding of what's in the deal. Iran is saying that the deal is one thing. We are saying that it is actually something completely different. And so unless and until we actually see the agreement and what's in it, well, one, it's hard to know what actually the agreement is, and then moreover, if there even is one.
Yeah, and so I believe J.D. Vance and a representative of the Iranian government are going to be meeting and signing this in a neutral country, probably Switzerland or Oman. I believe Switzerland. Yeah, but that's a while. There's a whole, seemingly, there's a week until that happens or so, 6 days, I guess, as of now, because it's about 4 a.m. over here in Toronto. So there's plenty of time for it to sabotage this. There's plenty of time for something to go wrong in this. So fingers crossed that peace prevails. That's, of course, what we want. We want an absolute end to this god-awful catastrophe of a war. You know, we're just have to be realistic about what we're seeing here.
So we're going to get into what is suspected to be in the deal. We're going to work through some of these discrepancies, and we'll talk about what each side is claiming in the deal. And based on that, we're going to talk about whether it's even going to happen and what the prospects are that there'll be a longer-term permanent peace agreement in the future. Because so much of what is even said to be in the deal is actually stuff that's going to be figured out at a later date. And I would say that the way to understand the agreement is they're effectively deferring all of the real issues concerning centrifuges, concerning highly enriched uranium, sanctions, frozen funds. All of that is going to be talked about within the next 60 days. This agreement is formalizing the ceasefire and extending it for 60 days. And you could say that maybe this is happening with a little bit more finality than the original ceasefire in April. But we are not really over the finish line quite yet. I think it's maybe overstating it to say that the war is over.
Yeah, we must make this distinction because I think the media are just jumping to conclusions with this. Most influencers are jumping to conclusions to say the war is completely over. You know, peace deal is completely signed now. I get the optimism, but we have to be careful. We have to, we have to keep our sharpness when it comes to this and go that this might fall apart.
Seems like it may actually be far from over. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to get into everything. We're going to unpack it in a very systematic way. We're also going to talk about the role that Israel will play. It's very interesting. From the very beginning, ever since October 7th and throughout all of this, the fighting in Gaza, the fighting in Lebanon, the fighting in Iran, one of the reasons that I have had the best record predicting everything that has happened and why I've had the best analysis of everything in the conflict is because, of course, I and we are the only people that affirm Israel's central role in driving all of these events. And there are other commentators that will acknowledge that Israel is playing a part. And of course, they will acknowledge what side Israel is on, what their agenda is, and what they want to happen. But I think that almost everybody else, other than this movement and myself in particular, they really understate the extent to which it is actually the engine of everything. They are setting the tempo. They are the catalyst. They are the precipitating cause of all of the major events.
You could say they're the ones conducting, in a way. You could say these are the people that set the timing. These are the people that really set the key that we're in over here. This is a fundamental problem, right? Is that we're playing in their format, right? It's like we're playing under their rules in their arena. If you get what I'm saying, we're not living within a system where we control, all right?
It's really Israel's timeline. It's their agenda. It's their ambitious project, and everybody else is really along for the ride. You could say they are acting and everybody else is reacting. Everybody else is maneuvering according to how it acts in the theater. And so once again, just as before, we cannot really talk about the U.S.-Iran deal mediated by Pakistan and Qatar without talking about what Israel's response is going to be and how they are involved. And what seems to be the case in this agreement, just like in the original ceasefire in April, is that this entire thing is going to hinge upon Israel's compliance. Sort of ironic because the parties to the agreement are the United States and Iran. And each of them are trying to build rapport, and they're going to carry out certain provisions of the agreement based on performance or compliance, whether each side is holding up their end of the bargain. And yet whether the agreement succeeds is really dependent on the actions of a country that is not even involved in the agreement. They're not even a party to it. And that is Israel, specifically concerning their conduct in Lebanon.
Isn't it so disgusting, especially when you get the rhetoric from people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, all the other people in the Israeli government, where they are posturing and essentially saying, no, United States, no, President Trump, you can't extricate yourself from this conflict because we need you in this war. Like, think about how perverse, what is more disgusting than that? Right? It's a third party saying, no, you can't stop this war. In fact, we're going to make sure, and we're going to do things to make sure that you stay in this war. I mean, it's so sick and perverse.
Whether we have a deal, whether the ceasefire or this memorandum of understanding will hold, or whether the whole thing will come apart, it really depends upon whether it is going to go along with the agreement, whether they will abide by what Trump wants them to do, which is to stop bombing Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the background there over the past 2 weeks, but also over the past 8 weeks, and how that theater is influencing what is happening in the Persian Gulf. Because that's, I would say, kind of the operative feature here. That's kind of the operative thing, is whether it is going to stop bombing Lebanon. I think that really determines whether you have a deal at all. Seems like almost everything else can be smoothed out. Almost everything else can be finessed, or there can be a spin so that each side can save face. But the one thing that doesn't seem to be able to be budged here is Israel's willingness to join in and be a party to this. So we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah, side note, I've been seeing some Hezbollah FPV drone footage where they're attacking IDF soldiers, and man, it is brutal. It's just like, it's so similar to Ukrainian and Russian drone footage. Like that's just war now, right? Whenever we see war footage now, a lot of it pops up on my feed, but it's mainly just FPV footage. It's actually getting kind of crazy.
It's going to be a really good show, very interesting. We're going to get into everything, all the details, and it's going to be this is going to be a heavy show. This is going to be obviously very geopolitics centric, a lot of foreign policy stuff. Not a lot of jokes, not a lot of joking, because we have some serious business to take care of. We got to talk about a lot of things. It's going to be a long show, so buckle up, but it's going to be good. And I'm excited to get into it. So that's going to be our only story. We're going to get into some other stuff later in the week. I do want to talk about that Cornell student who said that he didn't want to work for a Jew. And now the Department of Justice says they're going to dox him and he's never going to work in America ever again. I want to get into that tomorrow.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I went to bat for that kid on Twitter. All I said was, I think it's, and I still think the same thing, that I think it was, kind of irresponsible and stupid to respond to a work email like that, or a prospective employer. I guess he didn't view them as prospective, but somebody that is a multimillionaire, somebody who is connected, to send them an email like that. Yeah, that's not very smart. But to be completely doxxed and your whole life ruined, and these billionaires come after you and network together so that you will never have a career ever again, and they're all doing it in the name of Judaism. That's just wrong. Austin Franco, he's a 19-year-old from Cornell. So, he liked that tweet. He saw that. And you know what? He seems like a decent kid. I don't know about his Lord Miles connection. I think Miles Rutledge, or you guys might know him as Lord Miles. I don't really trust that guy. Nothing really against him, but he's connected. Franco's connected to Lord Miles, and I don't know. He seems like kind of a British spook. I'm not going to lie, Miles.
And I think there's a couple of other stories like Gavin Newsom and some other things. We're going to have to save that for tomorrow and Wednesday, but for tonight, I want to make sure we focus everything on the MOU and the future of the conflict with Iran, because this is very important stuff. So that's going to be the big one. Before we get into the news, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble, smash the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think about the show. Remember to check out our merch store at Fuentes.store. We have our brand new spring collection. Summer collection, we're still working on it. It's always a little bit slow, but that's totally fine. Summer collection is loading. We're loading it up and we're getting ready for it. We have to push it back a little bit. That's fine.
Bro, it's like most of my clothing purchases are just like AF now, bro. It's just like Fuentes.store. That's actually where I'm getting most of my clothing, bro. For real. That's where you should be getting most of your clothing, actually. It's great quality, rep. And you know what? I see people in public that are repping it, bro. That's an easy fist bump, bro. And you see somebody else, you see another guy wearing America First merch, fist bump him, bro. Shout out to all the fellow Groypers.
It's okay. I'm not going to complain about it because it's totally fine. If you want to support the show, check out our website. You're subscribed on Rumble, but you have to be a Plus subscriber at americafirst.plus. $15 a month to get access to the archive, every episode of the show, every debate, commentary stream, gaming stream, interview. It's all up there. That's for 15 bucks a month. For $100 a month, you get to be in my exclusive Telegram group chat. And I'm in there, so you can talk to me, hang out with me. And I'm also leaving a lot of bonus content in there. As the MOU was being negotiated, I was in there all day yesterday, dropping bonus content. I think I wound up doing about an hour, hour and a half of extra content in the group chat just today and yesterday, talking about everything. So if you don't want to wait for the show, like during the weekend, if you don't want to wait for my take, you got to get in the group chat because that's where all the best analysis is being posted. So check it out. That's AmericaFirst.plus. Okay, with that, we are going to get into it. One other thing before we get into the show, I just have to say, very sad. Rest in peace to Oliver Tree. So heartbreaking. I thought it was a joke. Did you guys hear the news?
Yeah, it's just such a tragedy, man. So horrible. I mean, that guy's music was like the soundtrack in the last few years. For me, at least personally, it's kind of like the soundtrack to like hanging out with friends and like going out partying. Like so many good times just bumping that guy's music, going out and just vibing and shit like that. So it's just such a horrible, horrible accident and tragedy to see.
Oliver Tree, who is like a dance music, I guess that's what it is, like electronic dance music artist, died in a helicopter crash in Brazil over the weekend. He's only 31 years old. And he died along with some YouTuber and like a half dozen other people. And that's really a bummer. I was a fan. I posted that on Telegram. I posted it in my group chat, and everybody was saying, who's Oliver Tree? I'm like,
how do you not know who Oliver Tree is at this point, bro? You saw his haircut, bro, the bowl cut with the long hair at the back, bro. It was goated, man. Oh my God, like what a creative person, bro. It's so sad. And how does a collision like that happen in midair?
like Oliver Tree, alien boy, hello? Life goes on. And what's that other song?
I gotta say, my favorite song of his was Miss You. That song just goes so hard, dude. R.I.P., bro. That too many bangers, bro.
I forget the other one that I like. There's a few other songs that I like. I was a big fan. I love his music. I love his music videos. I thought he was funny. He had the giant scooter. He had the bowl cut. And I like the songs. So that's a real bummer. That really sucks. I don't know why people still get in the helicopters. I don't know about you guys. I am never getting in a helicopter. How many celebrities have to die?
Bro, I always think of Stevie Ray Vaughan when I think of these kind of helicopter accidents. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up listening to Stevie Ray, and like that's just one of the most crazy stories to me. But yeah, he's totally right. They're just so sketchy of vehicles. I would never get in a helicopter. I've always been pretty anti-helicopter for a long time. It's just too sketchy of a design of a vehicle.
Before you just, especially if you're a celebrity. I understand if you're a civilian, you might think the coast is clear, but I feel like celebrities are dying in helicopter crashes like every few months. So if you're a celebrity, you just can't. Why are we still doing that? We got to stop. We can't be flying in helicopters anymore. I will never get in a helicopter. Kobe Bryant, Oliver Tree, Jim Croce. Did he die in a plane, or I think he died in a plane crash? I feel like the private jets are safer than the helicopters. But yeah, like what are we thinking? People are just dying in helicopters every day now.
I mean, this week was a massive L for Brazil, okay? Like the Oliver Tree like tragedy, and then the video of like the girl getting thrown off of the bungee, like jumping like bridge thing, whatever, with the bungee not attached, and she just straight up died. What is going on in Brazil, bro? I mean, I know everyone's gonna make the comments like, why would you get into a helicopter in Brazil? And yeah, you know what? I agree. I would never get inside of a helicopter in the first place, but let alone in a third world country. Never in 1,000 years would you catch me.
I'm not victim blaming. I'm not saying it's his fault, but like, why are we getting, and in Brazil of all places? And then I saw a video this weekend. Did you see there was like a viral video? I think it was either Brazil or Mexico, where this like 21-year-old girl was bungee jumping and they forgot to put the bungee cord on her harness. So they just threw her off a cliff. I've never seen it done like that before. They literally had her hoisted over their head. She's like this.
How does no one notice? Like, that's like, it is such a wild video to watch. Like, they literally just pick her up and throw her right off. They got to be like 100 meters up in the air plus. Like, when you see it from the ground, you're like, oh my God, yeah, completely unsurvivable. And the interview with the woman that tended to her when she was dying is, yeah, it's just sad.
And they just threw her off a cliff and she just fell and died because they forgot to put the bungee cord on her. It's like, you can't get in a helicopter. You shouldn't be jumping out of a plane or jumping off a cliff anyway. But then you go and do it in Brazil and Mexico. I feel like it's just asking for trouble. Did you see that video? It's like horrifying. They literally picked this girl up and then they just threw her off the cliff. It's like nobody checked.
You know, Brazil's taking a heavy L this week. Yeah, like, bro, I'm not going to third world countries, just straight up. Never catch me in third world countries. Like, I'm going to like America, most of Europe, and like Japan and Korea. Like, that's where Australia, I'll go to Australia. But I'm not really going anywhere else in the world, bro, to be honest.
Is this like a business? Don't you do this every day? Like, you wake up, go to work, time to put the bungee cord on the customers. Bunch of drunk Mexicans, they forgot to put the fucking clip on her, so they just threw her off a cliff, and then it's horrible. I shouldn't laugh. But it is kind of funny. It's a horrible tragedy, but like, they just threw her off and just, you know, she just hit the ground.
I mean, both these things, not only is it Brazil, but you got to think both these things are actually kind of similar in the fact that you got to ask yourself, like, how rare of a chance is it that helicopters collide in midair like that? You know, like, what are the chances that they just straight up don't hook you on your bungee cord? It's kind of wild. You can just be taken out of this plane of existence instantaneously tomorrow. Nothing you can do about it, seems.
So I'm not doing that. I'm not getting on a helicopter. As a matter of fact, I'm just not even going to Brazil. Like, I'm not going to Brazil. I don't want to go to Mexico. I'm good here. But anyway, so I just want to say that. F in the chat, please. F's in the live chat. R.I.P. Rest in peace, Oliver Tree. Will be missed. Great artist. You got to load up the Spotify playlist in his memory. But anyway, with that out of the way.
31 years old, man. I mean, honestly, it's just like and he is such a good guy too. Everything I've seen about Oliver Tree, he's just a completely positive guy. He is just a bastion of creativity, completely humble, very fun, caring person. No one has anything bad to say about him whatsoever. You know, it just rings true that, you know, it seems like only the good die young.
We are going to move on. We're going to dive into the show. Obviously, there's some very big news, which is that at long last, we finally have the Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States. And there is so much to say about it because, like with everything else in this war, it's very ambiguous. And this has characterized the war from the beginning. The way that I would say it is the war is happening in reality, and at the same time, the war is being talked about in press releases and through the media. And what is interesting is that what is being said through press releases and in the media almost has no relation to what is actually happening in reality in the world. And what I mean by that is, how many times have we heard over the past 3.5 months that a ceasefire is imminent, that we have these advanced negotiations? How many times has Trump threatened to bomb Iran or annihilate their civilization? There has been so much deception about what exactly we are doing there, the number of casualties, the extent of the damage we're inflicting, the objectives in the conflict, what the strategy is. Everything has been up in the air. There's been a lot of deception and perception management. And so this memorandum of understanding is no different than everything else. There is this very thick and heavy fog of war that we have to actually parse through and figure out what is going on, what's happening in reality. What do the 3 or 4 major players want here? What are they saying? Who's telling the truth here?
Yeah, the major thing is we don't even know what the terms of negotiations actually are, what the demands are of each side, what's been agreed to, what hasn't been agreed to, like what has to be worked out. We have really no idea, except for a little bit of rumors here and there, a bit of hearsay.
We're going to have to break down all of it. So it was announced this weekend that finally, and this we know for sure, there is an agreement. Now, they're calling it a Memorandum of Understanding. This is different from a treaty because a treaty has to be ratified by the legislature. It's even different than an agreement. A Memorandum of Understanding is much more informal. It's more of an agreement in principle without a lot of specifics, and it doesn't govern all of the big issues. So what this really is, the way to think about it, is this is a formalization of the ceasefire that was already in place. Technically speaking, there has been a ceasefire between the United States and Iran since around April 8th. But that was never a written agreement. That is something that was announced by President Trump on Truth Social. It was acknowledged by the Iranian government and the intermediary which negotiated this, which brokered the deal, which was Pakistan. But there was never a written agreement. It was never signed. It was never ratified. So you had this very informal, let's say, a truce or a ceasefire. Now, this is being upgraded to what they're calling a Memorandum of Understanding. Now, this, as far as we know, is a written agreement, and it will be signed by both parties. But this, too, just like the ceasefire, is also a short-term truce. It extends the ceasefire by 60 days, and in particular, it governs the actual operational details on the ground, specifically as it pertains to military operations in Lebanon, in the Persian Gulf, what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's closure of it, the U.S. economic blockade of the strait.
Yeah, major sticking points like nuclear enrichment, missiles, proxies, these kinds of things. There haven't been major announcements of what exactly, though, because that's what everyone cares about. Let's be real. We care about what have you guys agreed to or going to talk about when it comes to nuclear weapons,
as well as potentially some monetary transfers. Now, like I said, there is an agreement. Apparently, it is written, and it also has been signed. So there was all this talk over the weekend that an agreement had been reached, and they said it would be signed this week, which is, we're now in this week. It's going to be signed on Friday. Then it was revealed that the deal was actually already signed electronically. So there's an agreement, it's written, and apparently it's also already been signed over the internet. And this was confirmed by the United States, then by Iran, and then by Pakistan. So there is an agreement, and it's real. But this is where it gets complicated. We don't actually know what's in it. We know, like I said, there's an agreement, it's written, it's signed. Every party has acknowledged that this has happened. So the United States and Iran are the signatories. It was brokered jointly by Pakistan and Qatar, supporting role played by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others. That is as much as we know for sure, because this is what has been confirmed publicly. The actual details of the agreement are unclear. The text of the agreement has not been released. Now, we don't know when we're going to see it. There are some senior U.S. officials who have said that we will see the agreement within 24 to 48 hours. And that was said this morning.
It seems like what's going on with it not being released is kind of interesting. Of course, there's a lot of ruckus in the Israeli camp. They are furious. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, we're going to get into details, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on behind the scenes as to like why they are delaying the release of this. Like I said, we don't know the major conditions. What are the actual sticking terms of this agreement.
So we could see it as soon as tomorrow or Wednesday, but other members of the government, like President Trump, have said that we will see the agreement after Friday, after it is signed in a ceremony in Switzerland on Friday. So we haven't seen it. We don't even really know when we're going to see it. It could be tomorrow. It could be Saturday. We're not even sure. With that being said, both sides are leaking to the press what is in the agreement. Iran was actually first to the punch, and they said yesterday in their state broadcaster what is in the agreement, and they gave their account of it. Now, the United States has responded and actually disputed some of the details. There seem to be some major discrepancies about the agreement. And we're going to work through, this is an article from the New York Times talking about where we are here. And then we're going to talk about some of the provisions. We'll talk about what the deal covers, what each side is saying about what the deal does, and we'll talk about who's right here. So this is from the New York Times. It says, quote, with the full text of the deal to end the war between the U.S. and Iran still under wraps, confusion reigned on Monday about just what negotiators for the two countries had actually agreed to. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel said the Israeli forces would remain in Lebanon, and Iran disputed contentions by the Trump administration that ships will be able to transit the Strait of Hormuz without charge, saying it intended to charge fees but not tolls. A ceremonial signing of the agreement is to take place on Friday in Geneva. On Sunday, the United States and Iran signed a framework agreement ending their months-long war, but a day later, officials on both sides were making conflicting statements about its terms. The agreement's immediate scope was focused primarily on ending military strikes and allowing traffic to resume through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global shipping lane. But American and Iranian officials acknowledged that they had put off discussions of their most serious disagreements until a later round of talks. For his part, Mr. Netanyahu on Monday appeared to distance himself from the deal and to suggest that he did not feel bound by it. Mr. Trump said the deal would restart safe passage of oil tankers through the strait as soon as Friday, solving a problem which did not exist until the U.S. and Israel initiated the war.
It's so wild. You see MAGA supporters, Donald Trump supporters are celebrating this as some kind of victory. It's like you can't even call it a Pyrrhic victory, dude. This is a total strategic loss. You essentially just handed over sovereignty to the Strait of Hormuz, caused an international, economic crises, and then celebrated when the Strait of Hormuz reopened. It's like, give me a break.
Returning the strait to its pre-war conditions could relieve Americans of soaring gas prices. And after the deal, a 60-day period of negotiations toward a comprehensive peace agreement would begin. The talks are likely to be complex, and the deal could still come apart. Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, said on Monday that negotiations would grapple with two issues on which neither side has shown much willingness to compromise, which is the easing of American economic sanctions against Iran and limiting Tehran's nuclear program. And they will be made more difficult, he said, by a history of broken promises. So here is what we know about the deal. What the deal covers, and this is the structure of the deal. The deal covers, in particular, the actual fighting between the United States and Iran. So we could call that the business of the actual ceasefire. So what the Memorandum of Understanding does, first and foremost, is it ends the war. It says that there's a cessation of all hostilities in the Persian Gulf, and then maybe more controversially and more contentiously, also in Lebanon. So that's number one. Number two, it governs what happens in the strait. So currently, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States has blockaded the Strait of Hormuz to Iranian commercial shipping. So in addition to ending all hostilities in the Gulf and in Lebanon, the deal also has this mutual opening of the strait. The U.S. ends its blockade, and Iran opens up the strait.
Let's be real. I think Trump has been very, very focused on that. This is the main thing for him, at least. I don't think that America really actually cares if Iran goes nuclear. I mean, yeah, there's a strategic, objective to, have proliferation. But at the end of the day, that's much more Israel's problem than it is America's. And having the global economy just collapsing due to the Strait of Hormuz crises, that's just unacceptable. That affects all of us.
So you could say that's the business of the Strait of Hormuz and its opening. The third part of the deal is actually talking about the future negotiations on the deeper, more systemic issues, which are the nuclear program and the sanctions. And if you recall, those are actually the reasons the war started in the first place. This is why the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran last year, and ostensibly this is why we attacked Iran again this year. It was to degrade or potentially destroy Iran's nuclear program, to degrade and destroy their missile arsenal, ultimately to seek regime change. Now, we're not even considering regime change, obviously. The Iranian regime will not negotiate its own destruction. Iran has ruled out any discussions about their missile program or their proxies.
I have seen some people go, oh, well, it would have just been a better thing if we had just gone all the way to Tehran and actually done a full regime change. That would have been a better outcome. Like, how would that be a better outcome? What, strategically, America would deplete its army completely, probably thousands of casualties. While I still think war is still possible, these people that are saying that, we should have just, crushed them and done that because we would have been better off. I just don't buy that for a second.
And so the only issue that we actually got into the war in the first place to solve, which is the nuclear issue, it's not even covered by this memorandum of understanding. The only thing the MOU says about that is that we're going to talk about it later. And so you could say the third thing is the business of future talks. It says that while this ceasefire is extended and while we open up the strait, there will be a 60-day period where we basically negotiate the rest. And so then once this MOU is finalized, once we have the ceremonial signing on Friday and the war ends, the strait opens, then there's sort of like a phase 2 that begins. There's this 60-day period where now we're going to get down to business and figure out what we're going to do about Iran's centrifuges, which enrich uranium, their already existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and then how we're going to incentivize them to do this by, over time, unfreezing the money that has been frozen in foreign banks, which is Iranian money, and the lifting of primary and secondary sanctions, which have been applied because of Iran's nuclear program. So those are kind of the three big categories of the MOU.
And keep in mind, Israel does not want an economically strong and prosperous Iran. It wants Iran weak and subdued, because if Iran has all of this money coming in, if it's a strong international trade partner, then that gives them tons and tons of money for a massive conventional army, a country of, I believe, 92 million people. They already have a very large conventional force, and they displayed what they're able to do with that. If they're able to get an economy worth hundreds of billions, perhaps even $1 trillion economy, then that'll allow them to have overwhelming fire superiority against the Gulf countries, and ultimately any country that really wants to mess with them. They don't really need nuclear weapons in that case.
It is ending the war, it's opening up the strait, and then it's talking about the future conditions under which we'll negotiate about those deeper, more structural issues. Now, the first thing to say about the MOU, which is really interesting, and this is really the headline and this is the obvious, is this basically confirms that the United States has lost the war. One way to look at this is it is a unilateral surrender. This is a unilateral withdrawal and ending of the conflict by the United States because we lost. The war for us became too economically costly, too militarily costly, such that we could not sustain it. And what I'm talking about specifically is as long as Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, we are being bled economically.
Not only that, but Trump spent all his political capital on this. Think about like what we could have done, what the far right could have done with mass deportations, all right? But no, that was too unpopular to do. We couldn't do mass deportations because the public wouldn't like that. And then you launched the most unpopular war in U.S. history. Like, think about the political capital that has just been absolutely blown, like it's thrown on a stripper at a strip club or something.
Because of the high oil prices, which can only be offset by depleting our strategic petroleum reserve, which is about to run out. It just hit the lowest level since the Reagan administration 50 years ago. So we have literally been bled dry of oil. And what would have happened next is that energy prices would have skyrocketed, would have pushed inflation even higher, and could have collapsed our economy. And by the way, that might still happen next year. There's actually a pretty good chance there might be a recession anyway. There's always an economic contraction that follows an energy shock. So economically, we just could not go on without opening up the Strait of Hormuz to Iran's oil. And then militarily, the same thing is also true. We did not stop bombing Iran because Iran was giving us concessions. We stopped bombing Iran because it was hurting us more than it was hurting them. As long as we were bombing Iran, Iran was raining missiles and drones on the Gulf countries, U.S. bases, and Israel. And it got to a point where it was draining our stockpile of missile interceptors, which we're going to need for future conflicts. We burned through, by some estimates, 70% of our stockpile. And then, notwithstanding the fact that we're burning up all our interceptors, Iran's drones and missiles are still impacting U.S. bases and the Gulf countries, and they've done hundreds of billions of dollars in damage to 9 to 15 U.S. military installations. So it was becoming economically costly because of the oil. It's also becoming unbearable militarily because they're basically destroying our military footprint, which exists in about a half dozen countries across the Middle East. So we were in a position where we had to sue for peace. And the reason you know this is because ask yourself, if this MOU only governs these three issues, which are, we're going to stop bombing them permanently, Iran is going to open up the strait, and then there's a commitment to talk about their nuclear program in the future, ask yourself, what are we getting out of this agreement? The answer is nothing. We're getting nothing out of this.
Like, Iran gets what they want out of this. Iran gets peace. They get to be left alone. They essentially get control over the Strait of Hormuz, which they didn't have before the war. But the United States is just at a loss here. We do not have any sort of control over the strait. Iran is going to get all this money back, and they're going to use it to rebuild their military and all of that. It's like, what does America actually get out of all of this? No, it's just Trump brought America to an L. This is a total loss.
We're going to stop bombing Iran? Well, that's good for Iran. We launched the war. We dropped 15,000 bombs on Iran. We killed their supreme leader. We sunk their navy. So not bombing them anymore, forcing it to stop bombing Lebanon, that's a win for Iran and Hezbollah because we initiated the hostilities. Opening up the strait, well, the strait was open before the war. The strait was open before the war. The strait has always been open. So what we got is we resumed what was already happening before the war. And then as far as future negotiations on the nuclear program are concerned, well, we were already negotiating a nuclear deal last year, this year. The Biden administration was doing it in 21 and 23. We were doing it in 2018 and 2019. So we can talk about commitments and promises, and there are these vague concessions that are being floated by both sides. But until you have a nuclear agreement, all you have are these talks, and we've been talking for 10 years. We've been talking longer than that.
Yeah, like really, until it's ratified by Congress, Like, I really don't believe it. Like, when are we going to get a full peace treaty between these two countries, bro? Like, America and Iran need to be like, we're not fighting anymore. We've had our beef. We've had our exchange. We've had a taste of what war is like between the United States and Iran. We know what it looks like. All right. We've played it out in real life. We don't want any more of that smoke, dude. Like, straight up, it still wants that smoke. It still is pushing for involvement, still pushing for bombs to be dropped. They don't want to drop the bombs themselves. They would much rather the Western world, all of the Christian nations, come and drop bombs on Iran for them.
So what did we get out of it? Nothing. What we got out of it is a return to the status quo before the war. So we have secured nothing out of the agreement, even only when you're looking at the categories. But then it gets even worse when you talk about what is in the deal, what actually is in these specific categories. Like, for example, the Strait of Hormuz in particular. Not only is Iran merely opening up the strait, which was open before the war started, but the strait is being opened under new conditions. Unlike before the war, now Iran is claiming formal and legal control over the strait. So one way to say this is that before the war, Iran was responsible for 4% of the world's oil exports. So they controlled 4% of the world's oil because that is the oil that they produced and exported. And so whether they constrained their own supply, you could say that they had control and influence over 4% of the world's oil.
It's like crazy, bro. They leveled up. Now they get to put a tax. They get to levy a whole ass tax, bro, on, what is it, 25% of the entire world's energy. Like, it's crazy, bro.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz has 20% of the world's oil moving through it every single day. If Iran is now claiming that they legally and formally control that waterway and they reserve the right to close it completely or selectively, if they're claiming they have the right to demand that all shipping has to get permission from the IRGC and maybe even pay a fee or a toll to get access to the strait, that means they've effectively annexed the strait and they've taken control over 20% of the world's oil. If they get full control over whether that oil goes to the market or not, that means they control now a fifth of the world's oil supply.
Yeah, think about, do the math real quick of like cash flow. And it's pretty easy. If they're levying a tax of what we've rumored to hear of $1 to $2 million per ship, which is something to do with like $1 per barrel of oil or something like that, in that kind of vague range, that if we return to pre-war levels of traffic through the strait, then you're looking at between 100 to 200 ships going through a day. That's just an easy, depending on how much they're charging, $100, $200 million, probably more a day. Very easy to rebuild your army on something like that, especially if you're one of these rising middle powers.
So it's actually worse. Not only are we negotiating to open the strait, which had been open prior to the conflict, now the strait is opening under new management. And we're effectively conceding it to Iran. It's now theirs, they own it, and owning it, they get to charge a rent on it. They get to charge a toll. Then you consider how we got Iran to the negotiating table. We are talking about unfreezing their money. We're talking separately. This is also part of the agreement. In order for them to even negotiate with us and come to the table, we talked about, one, unfreezing their frozen assets, which are being held in foreign banks. And then separately, we're also talking about a fund, which is much bigger than that, created by the Gulf countries, which will subsidize the reconstruction of Iran's country to the tune of $300 billion. So think of it. We're getting nothing, even when you consider the categories. The deal is we're going to stop bombing you. The strait will be opened like it was before, but also you now own it. And in order for us to get the privilege of you giving us the oil that we were already getting and you making money off of it, we're also going to pay you. We're going to unfreeze $25 billion in previously frozen assets, and we're going to put together a consortium of Gulf countries to fund your reconstruction to the tune of $300 billion.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like that Gulf money, the U.S. government is probably paying a lot of these Gulf countries to pay off Iran. Let's be real. It's probably a lot of your tax dollars that's going off to just straight up bribe Iran to like end this war. Like, let's be real. This is a massive bribe to end the war. That's what that is. This is like medieval levels of humiliation where now you have to show up to Iran with $300 billion and hand it over to him. I mean, that's humiliating as hell, dude.
What do we get out of it? Well, we get the promise that in 60 days, Iran might talk to us about limiting their nuclear program. That's what we get. So in reality, we're not bombing them. In reality, they control the strait. In the future, they've promised us they might put some restrictions on their nuclear program, which, by the way, they're keeping. So we get nothing.
You'd have to be such a doofus to think that they're not working on a nuclear bomb right now. Dude, like, come on. Think about it for 2 seconds. Yeah, they're not stopping working on a nuclear weapon, dude. Look at all of what they went through. America literally just assassinated their supreme leader, right? Who's a religious figure, his death united a large amount of the Sunni and the Shia world together against what they believe is the great shaitan.
Get nothing out of this. Think about everything that has happened over the past 100 days. You've got more than a dozen dead Americans, hundreds injured, tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars in damage to U.S. bases and other military facilities in the region. We've probably spent something like $100 billion on the actual fighting itself, the carrier strike groups, the interceptors, the 15,000 airstrikes. The actual price tag of it maybe was $100 billion. Then it's the cost of replenishing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Then it's the cost to our economy. And in the end, what did we actually accomplish? What we set out to achieve was regime change, destroying their missile production capability and stockpile, destroying their drone production capability and stockpile, getting the highly enriched uranium out of the country, destroying their nuclear centrifuges.
And the thing is, too, I hate to see America take an L. That's the thing. That's what's enraging is that Trump brought America into this war, and now you hate to see it. But it's the reality that we live in. This is nothing but a strategic L.
We achieved none of that. And if anything, you could say at best, we're going back to the status quo. In reality, it's slightly worse. So this is a conflict which may have cost us something like $1 trillion when all is said and done. Certainly it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. In the long run, it might be up to $1 trillion. We achieved zero of our war aims. And in reality, Iran has actually gained something. So to me, this is really the big picture. This is the headline. Before you even get into, and we're going to talk about how we got here. We're going to get through some of these discrepancies and what will happen. Let's just say, even in the best case scenario, we have this memorandum of understanding. It ends the war. It paves the way for future negotiations. We'll see what happens with that. Forget about the rest. If this is the deal, on its face, we lost. We lost. And they're going to spin it, and the administration is going to finesse this, and they're going to do these semantic tricks to try to convince you that Iran isn't really getting what they got. But there's no way around it. This was objectively a strategic defeat. It's a rout. It's unambiguous, undeniable. It's not up for debate. We just lost the war. And how else would you say it? We went into it on February 28th. Trump said, we want regime change. We're going to destroy your missiles. We're going to destroy your nuclear program.
Remember all that talk of it's a new regime? There's already been regime change. We won the war. They're going to do what we say. Like, bro, look at where we are now. And then we're handing over the Strait of Hormuz to them. It's insane to watch.
We are going to open up the strait. None of this has happened. We're suing for peace. We're bribing Iran to make an agreement. And unilaterally, we're pulling out. We lost. But I do want to get into some of these specific provisions. So let's talk about these different categories. Now, what are the actual terms of the agreement? This is where it gets a little bit tricky because there's some disagreement. What has been reported by the Iranian side is this. And we're going to start with Iran because they were the first ones to actually leak the details through their state broadcaster. Then we'll talk about what is in contention from the U.S. side. So what Iran says is in the agreement is as follows. It is a permanent ceasefire, an end to hostilities on all fronts, which means the Persian Gulf, but also in Lebanon. So Iran is telling us this memorandum of understanding, it means the war between the U.S. and Iran is over, but also the war between Israel and Hezbollah is over also. It means Israel cannot Lebanon anymore. That's a really big deal, and we'll get into that. That's a huge part of this.
Yeah, it wants to expand northwards due to essentially geography, right? So it, on a lot of its borders, is actually quite squishy and soft, right? So think of things in like Europe, right? Of like the Fulda Gap, right? These kind of, openings in the geography where an advancing army can just steamroll right through. That happens to be Israel's current predicament with its current borders, or you should say its ever-changing borders. But it needs to essentially, from the greater project perspective, Israel's northern flank, they feel like they need to go all the way to the northern border of Syria with Turkey, essentially to where there's physically mountains to the north. That way, in their idea, it can't be invaded if they secure all the way up to the north. And traditionally, there is this, it did happen actually, especially in ancient days, right? The early Israelis, Jews, whatever you want to call them, they did get invaded through these flat plains where it's excessively easy to just go traverse straight through.
That's number one. Number two, it says that the United States will end its blockade, its economic blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran will open the strait to commercial shipping. They say this will happen after the signing ceremony on Friday, and it will happen simultaneously, meaning the U.S. blockade will end at the same time that Iran opens the strait. Now, this next part is in contention. Iran says that in the future, the Strait of Hormuz will be governed by them and Oman. So Iran and Oman will determine how and under what conditions ships will be able to transit the strait. Now, they say that in this 60-day period when these other negotiations are happening, they will not charge a toll or fee. However, Iran says that after that 60-day period expires, they will begin to charge fees or a toll.
I believe this is something the United States has been saying that will not happen, that they do not want Iran to be charging a toll, that would be ultimately a bad thing, and the United States disagrees with that. We've heard this previously from U.S. officials. So if that still holds with the U.S. officials and they still believe that, that's not good. Then 60 days, they start charging that toll. Is the United States going to be mad about that?
Now, Iran is calling this an environmental fee, a service fee, an insurance fee. In reality, it's a toll. You can call it anything you want, but in the past, you did not need permission from Iran to go through. Now you do. In the past, it was free to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Now it costs you money. And again, they could call it a fee, they could call it a toll, call it whatever you want. Iran is formally claiming that they and Oman will govern the strait, and they reserve the right after this 60-day period to charge money. Call whatever you want. That is what they're saying. But they say the strait is open. Then there are some monetary attributes as well. Iran is claiming that the United States will unfreeze $25 billion in frozen funds upon completion of the 60-day period of negotiations, and that 50% of those funds will be made available up front. So it's $25 billion in frozen assets held in foreign banks. They will be unfrozen under the life of the deal, but up front, Iran gets half. So this is that $12 billion number you're hearing. Iran is claiming they're getting $12 billion up front, not contingent on compliance or performance. They're just getting it as a freebie. Additionally, there is talk of a $300 billion reconstruction fund, which will be funded by the Gulf countries. There's no details about this. And this sounds like the Gaza Peace Board. It's going to be spearheaded by Jared Kushner, like the Gaza Peace Board. It's going to involve the Gulf countries, like the Gaza Peace Board. Jared Kushner has a lot of relationships, as does Steve Witkoff, the other chief negotiator, Howard Lutnick. They do a lot of business in Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia. Presumably, it will be coming out of those sovereign wealth funds. They'll be funding through some consortium, this big fund, $300 billion to rebuild Iran. That's the second big monetary aspect, and that's separate from the frozen funds. You got $25 billion in frozen funds, which belongs to Iran. It's technically Iranian assets. They're just getting access to it. Then on top of that, separately, you have a $300 billion reconstruction fund being funded by the Gulf. Thirdly, the United States is giving sanctions waivers on all Iranian oil. So Iran is going to be able to now sell their oil without being sanctioned by the United States. Now, all the other primary and secondary sanctions remain in place, but they don't apply to Iran's oil because the U.S. wants that oil to hit the market. We don't care if Iran makes money off of it. We're going to let Iran make money off of their own oil because we need the supply to increase so the price can go down and stabilize. So those are some of the big things that the United States is giving to Iran. Unfreezing the money, $300 billion reconstruction fund, waivers so they can sell their oil. And then Iran has agreed that over the next 60 days, they're going to sit down with technocratic experts, nuclear experts, and they're going to negotiate on their nuclear program. And what has been discussed on this, again, nothing has been agreed to. They're talking about a longer-term permanent nuclear deal that will be passed by the UN Security Council. It will have Iran reaffirm its commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In other words, they'll vow they won't pursue a nuclear weapon. And it looks like there's actually even more give from the United States. Trump has indicated that he's willing to allow Iran to dilute their stockpile of highly enriched uranium. You might remember previously, Trump was demanding that they forfeit it to the United States. They have 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium, which would not take a lot more further enrichment to make it weapons grade to make nuclear bombs with it. Previously, Trump was insisting that they give it to us and no other country. They had to give us all of it, and that's the only way we were going to let them handle this.
What's so crazy about this talk of nuclear weapons, too, is it completely misses the fact that you have to miniaturize a nuclear weapon, which is arguably even more difficult than even making the nuclear bomb to begin with. To make like a regular atom bomb, like a gun style, they're extremely heavy and need to be dropped from an airplane, essentially making them just very unfeasible if you have stuff, that can shoot down airplanes, right? So it has to go on a missile, but to go on a missile, it has to be miniaturized into essentially what is a hydrogen bomb, right? And, it gets complicated there, but they're very complicated mechanisms. All right. And it's going to take Iran another 5 to 10 years to achieve miniaturization, which is key. You can't really skip over this. If you don't miniaturize your nuclear weapon, then it's essentially going to be massive, right? And heavy and not very powerful, right? Miniaturization also means that they're exponentially more powerful. We're talking to the tune of 10,000 50,000 times more powerful than what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Now Trump is saying we will allow the IAEA to enter Iran and oversee the dilution of that. So in other words, it goes from highly enriched to low enriched. And then as far as the enrichment is concerned itself, Trump seems to be willing to allow Iran to continue to enrich uranium at a very low level, which is exactly the provisions of the original Iranian nuclear deal. They might allow Iran to enrich up to 1.5%, 3% for peaceful energy purposes, which they can use in their nuclear reactors for nuclear energy. And that's what Trump is talking about in the future. And then depending upon whether Iran complies with those parts of the deal, then we're going to gradually take off primary and secondary sanctions that have been put on them because of the nuclear program. But again, none of that has actually been agreed to. That is all in the future. That's all contingent on these negotiations over the next 60 days. But there's no agreement on any of that. There's actually no concrete commitment on either side to any of that. So I don't even really consider that part of the deal because it really means nothing. So this is what has been said by Iran. Now, when these details came out yesterday and over the weekend, I was very skeptical because this has been the discussion for the past 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Ever since the middle of April, we have not been able to get a ceasefire. We've not been able to get an MOU or any kind of longer-term truce because of these specific critical issues. And they are, in particular, the fate of Lebanon, whether it will stop bombing Lebanon is a huge problem, whether Iran is going to charge tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. Because again, there's all this talk about opening the Strait of Hormuz. That's not really in contention. What's in contention is under what conditions.
People are just so desperate for the oil to hit the market. We've been talking about a little bit on the show lately about how oil prices right now haven't really made sense, especially due with, if you pay attention to what the strategic reserve levels around the world have been, they've been dropping very, very rapidly and in not good places. Like, I don't want to see Japan run out of oil. It's America run out of oil. Probably not going to happen, but still, it's just not good. And then you see, for instance, Russia getting hit all the time, constantly, especially at their oil depots and terminals and their oil drilling facilities. Their terminals are getting struck every single day. Massive amounts of oil and natural gas are being taken off the market every day by Ukraine. That drives the price up. And when their strategic reserves run out at the same time as Russian energy being taken off the market, and don't get me wrong, I kind of like to see Russia. I like to see Russia take it. Take a massive L. They can go screw themselves for all I care. But it ultimately does raise the price of energy worldwide. So you do see leaders panicking of like, what are we going to do to solve this?
Iran is willing to open up the strait, but they want to own it and profit from it. The United States wants them to open up the strait and just let everybody go like it was before the war. So if Iran is claiming that they control the strait and they reserve the right to charge money, again, you have to question, did the United States back off of its demands? And then the conditions under which the money will actually be dispersed, because this is also very central to the agreement. What Iran is looking for in general is they want sanctions relief and they want cash up front. They're saying, we want reparations now. We need the money, and we're either going to get it from sanctions relief so we can start making money, or we want reparations paid to us in cash up front so we just have the capital. And they don't necessarily care under what form it is, whether it's cash transfer from the Gulf or the United States, or it's unfrozen assets, or it's reparations, whatever you want to call it. But they want the money up front, and then they're going to do what we want them to do. That is in general what Iran's position has been. The United States has always insisted you're not getting cash up front. You're not getting sanctions relief up front, because those are the only means we have to ensure compliance. So rather, we would like to see sanctions relief cash conditioned upon their performance. In other words, if you hold up your end of the bargain, gradually we will give you money in some form. Gradually we will repeal the sanctions. Gradually we will disperse the frozen assets. And that's the only way, of course, that we can ensure Iran is ever going to hold up their end of the bargain and keep their commitments. So that's also been very contentious. It's not necessarily that Iran will get its money, that they will get sanctions relief. It's a question of when and how. So like I said, this is what Iran said the deal is. Iran and Pakistan are saying it's a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon.
Yeah, like I said earlier, this gives it so much time to sabotage everything. And it has been vehemently opposed to peace. They're the main roadblock against peace, and they're stating we are going to continue our war in Lebanon. Our troops are staying in Lebanon. We will bomb Lebanon. This is our reality. And so giving it all of this time in the world to maneuver and basically bring this peace to an end, that's bad.
Iran is saying we get $12 billion up front. Iran is saying we control the strait and we're going to charge a fee outside the 60 days. Now, the United States has disputed every single one of these things. The United States has said we are not giving Iran a cent until we actually see performance. And Vice President J.D. Vance did all the morning shows today, and he said, no, Iran is not getting any money. He said if they choose to comply with the agreement, then they can have a relationship with the United States where they can prosper. He said, but in other words, no, they're not getting any money unfrozen. No, they're not getting the $300 billion unless and until they open up the strait and they actively engage in nuclear negotiations. So they're disputing that monetary aspect. Trump administration also says, no, they're not charging a toll. The administration insists it's going to be freedom of navigation, meaning they don't need permission from the IRGC. They don't need to pay a fee to go through the strait, which of course Iran has said the opposite. And then the big one, the last one, is that the United States is saying it's not even part of this agreement. So they're not saying that there isn't a ceasefire in Lebanon. They're saying a ceasefire in Lebanon is just not even a condition of the agreement at all. They're saying we're agreeing to a ceasefire in the Persian Gulf. Lebanon and Israel is a separate issue. And they're saying this basically because they have to, because Israel refuses to be bound by the agreement. Ever since the agreement was announced, the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, has come out and he said, we are not bound by the agreement. We don't agree to a ceasefire in Lebanon. And as a matter of fact, we're going to keep going in Lebanon.
I mean, Trump should really just push this guy up against the wall, bro. Like Trump, where's the badass spirit of 2016, bro? That's what I miss about Trump. Trump would be the guy back in the day. He would have been the guy to push Netanyahu up against the wall and be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? We heard about in that phone call, right? But, he moves on Lebanon and you don't really get that much pushback. We're not hearing that much out of the White House about that. Netanyahu's being defiant. He's defying you, Trump. This is what I miss old Trump from back in the day.
So they're saying look, we're not a party to it. We don't agree anyway. And not only do we not agree, we're going to do the opposite of what the agreement says. And that may be the biggest contention of them all. But so these are the major discrepancies. And this is why you have to wonder, is there an agreement? There is, in principle, I guess in reality, there is a text somewhere, they signed something, so something exists with words on it. But is there agreement? There may be an agreement, but is there agreement between the two sides? Have they agreed to the same agreement? Have they agreed to the same text? That's the question. And right now, there are some major discrepancies. Now, once again, it has been said that the deal was signed yesterday. However, if the deal was signed, meaning that both sides reviewed the same text and signed confirming they agreed to it, why then are there these discrepancies? Iran came out yesterday and they said the deal was one thing, and J.D. Vance and President Trump have both come out today and said the deal is something else. So how do you account for these discrepancies? You have to wonder, was it actually signed? Or are they going to really sign it on Friday? If they signed it, why is there all this confusion? Now, the administration is telling us one reason. The administration says Iran is lying. They say because Iran is misrepresenting the deal to try to appease their domestic constituency. In other words, the Iranian people want a very good deal. If the Iranians come across like they got a bad deal, maybe the people are going to revolt against the IRGC-led government. So the Trump administration is saying the Iranian government has to lie and say they're getting a better deal than they really got to appease their population.
It doesn't sound like Donald Trump is saying that to appease his domestic population, his base. I mean, it's like the pot calling the kettle black, dude, right? I mean, it's ultimate projection, right? How else do you interpret this, right? I mean, you're totally just projecting what you actually see in yourself. At least that's how I see it, right? I mean, let's be real. Trump is misrepresenting the actual substance of the agreement, the negotiations to the American people all day, every day since the war started. Ever since we've heard about talks of peace, it's been completely misrepresented.
But that doesn't really track. And the reason that doesn't track is because what will happen is after Friday, we're going to know who's lying. You know, whether Iran is charging a toll or not. I mean, eventually we're going to see whether they're charging money, whether it is bound by this agreement. Again, we're going to see. If it keeps bombing Lebanon, then obviously they're not bound by the agreement. And if Iran adheres to it anyway, then they lied. But if that sabotages the agreement and Iran pulls out and closes the strait, then obviously it was us that was lying. So for the United States to say that Iran is just misrepresenting the details, they're lying about it, they just want to get their people on board, well, you know, sooner or later, the people are going to realize what's really in the agreement. So how efficacious would that really be? On the flip side, Iran is saying the same thing about us. You could equally say, if the United States is going out and saying, like Vance on the morning show and Trump on True Social, if on our side we are saying we didn't give Iran any money and we're not going to let them charge a toll, could they not say the same thing about us? What if the Trump administration is lying about this to save face on our end? We're the ones that need a quick ceasefire. We're the ones that need the oil. We're the ones that want to draw down the conflict in Iran so we could ramp it up in Cuba, so that we could focus on the midterm elections, we could get inflation under control. So who's to say the United States isn't lying? Haven't we been the ones lying all along about everything, about all of it? About like literally every single issue in the state of negotiations and bluffing about annihilating their civilization?
I mean, yeah, Trump brags openly last year about lying to the Iranians during negotiations so that he could catch them, that the United States and Israel could catch them off guard and assassinate their leadership, like that kind of stuff. So that's been going on from the very start of all of this.
And here's a perfect example. I would bet that after the 60 days expires, Iran is going to charge a toll on the Strait of Hormuz. And I would bet you that they're going to call it something other than a toll. And I would bet you that the United States is simply going to either lie that this is happening at all, because we've seen it happen, or they're going to say, well, it's not really a toll, it's actually a fee, it's something else, because this is what the Trump administration does. And we know that because they did it yesterday. Pete Hegseth went on the morning shows yesterday, and they asked him, they said, so what's going on with the agreement? And Pete Hegseth said, well, we control the Strait of Hormuz, and the Strait of Hormuz is open. And the interviewer said, so you got an agreement to open up the strait, which is already open because we control it? It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, Pete Hegseth is just a walking disaster of a Secretary of Defense. Bro, they literally hired some guy off the couch at Fox, okay, to do this. And he is just a total idiot, all right? He's like a boy playing with toys, all right? That's what this guy's vibe totally is. I can't stand Pete Hegseth at all. And it's just fake machismo, dude. You know that guy's breaking point is somewhere. Like, you know, it's like guys that put out this fake machismo. And it's like, yeah, dude, like your breaking point. You act like Iron Man. We know that's not you. This is like a mask. You know, it's like the ultimate mask that Pete Hegseth wears. He is a man of masks. I don't know. It's incredibly disingenuous kind of people.
And actually, that's been the line from the administration since the ceasefire. If you look at the tanker traffic, the strait has been closed. We have literally just been lying, and the government has been insisting that it is open. I mean, they've just simply been lying and in denial about this. So if there are discrepancies, and the discrepancies have emerged because one party of the agreement is lying to their own people to save face, I don't think it's Iran. It's probably the United States. But let's talk specifically about these discrepancies. I actually think that these don't matter too much. I think it is very likely that our side is lying. And I also don't think it matters at all. Probably the United States did allow money to be unfrozen and given to Iran. As a matter of fact, that has been reported by some sources that the United States authorized Qatar to unfreeze some money that then went to Iran before the MOU was even agreed to. And I believe that. And I believe that the United States would just simply lie about that. And I also think it's true that Iran is going to control the strait because they effectively do anyway. And they're going to use that control to charge a toll or charge a fee at some point. And I don't believe the United States will re-enter a conflict with Iran to prevent this from happening. And I think it's very plausible the United States will try to smooth that over, again, with this like semantic loophole and say, well, it's not really a toll. Actually, it's an insurance fee. It's an environmental fee. And I think they're perfectly willing to either lie that it's happening altogether, or again, they're going to find some loophole to spin it, and they're going to say it's not a toll when really it is.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. When you have no other way of escalating this militarily that has any chance of actually succeeding, this is the route that you have to go. And I don't really doubt these claims, to be honest, right? Like, if you want the strait to be open, then yeah, you're going to have to fork over another $12 billion right away, you know, just to get Iran to take you seriously.
Here is the biggest problem. The biggest problem is going to be the conflict in Lebanon. That may be the biggest sticking point. And the reason I say this is because that was the original undoing of the ceasefire back in April. You might remember that when the actual hostilities between the United States and Iran effectively ended 2.5 months ago at the beginning of April, that original ceasefire, the terms were that we would stop bombing Iran as long as Iran opened up the strait and then negotiated on their nuclear program. As a matter of fact, that original ceasefire agreement in April is identical to this one, because this is realistically the same thing. In April, Trump announced, we're going to stop bombing Iran, they're going to open the strait, and then over the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about nukes. This deal is virtually the same. We're saying there's a ceasefire. Iran is going to open up the strait. We're going to end our blockade. And then over the next 60 days, we're going to negotiate on the nuclear program. The only thing that has changed is we've actually given more. We've actually, in concrete terms, given financial commitments to put together this reconstruction fund, unfreeze this money. Potentially, we've already unfrozen some of the money and given them cash. That's the only difference. But if you recall, in that original ceasefire in April, Iran never opened the strait. That's why we're where we are today. Iran never opened the strait going back to the beginning of the war and continuing even through the so-called ceasefire in April. And why did Iran not open the strait? Because just like this memorandum of understanding, that ceasefire in April had all these discrepancies within 24 hours, just like this. The deal was announced on a Tuesday, and within hours, Iran and Pakistan, which brokered the agreement, said it's not just a ceasefire in the Persian Gulf, it's also a ceasefire in Lebanon as well, where Israel has resumed their war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Iran and Pakistan said that the agreement it's not even a question of, discrepancies or lying to your own people. Iran and Pakistan, which brokered the deal, they both said Washington agreed it's a ceasefire on all fronts.
Yeah, you need to rein in Netanyahu and Israel They can't be cavalier cowboys and just going around doing whatever they want to do. Inamar Ben-Gvir going around and saying it gets to decide. No, Ben-Gvir, it does not get to decide, all right? Israel's a tiny nation, all right? You have, 10 million people, and you want the United States to fight your wars for you? Well, guess what that means? It means you're actually going to have to listen to the United States. And when the United States says, hey, no more war with Iran and no more war with Lebanon, we need a U.S. president that'll actually tell Netanyahu no.
So they're not making that up. They didn't add that after the fact. They're not lying to their own people to sell it to their population. No, both Pakistan and Iran said back in April, Washington agreed it's a ceasefire everywhere. And if there's not a ceasefire everywhere, then there's no deal. And that's exactly what happened. Iran and Pakistan insisted, if you can't get Israel to stop attacking Lebanon, if you can't get a ceasefire on every front, then you're in violation of the deal. And if you're in violation, then we're not holding up our end and we're keeping the strait closed. And that's what happened. As soon as the deal was announced, Iran closed the strait again, and the strait has remained closed up until this day. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us that Iran, as well as Pakistan, the mediator, and Qatar, take this very seriously. They are insistent, and they've been insistent, that Lebanon is a part of any agreement. Not only is it a part of it, but it's actually a precondition for an agreement.
It's like the crux, bro. It's like, in a way, it's like the whole agreement hinges on Lebanon. If Israel continues to wage war on Lebanon, there will be no peace, because there isn't.
In order for Iran to open the strait, in order for Iran even to negotiate, in order for there to be a basis to negotiate with the United States and even make an agreement, Lebanon needs to be a part of it. And so if Lebanon is not a part of it, if the United States is telling us now, like they did in April, that Lebanon is outside the agreement, then there's no deal. And what's more, if it continues bombing Lebanon, then not only is there not a deal, but we're in violation of the deal. And that means, again, not only do we not have an agreement and you don't have diplomacy, but Iran is not going to hold up their end. They're going to keep the strait closed. And so that's why this is emerging as maybe the central problem. And this is where this discrepancy thing, it's going to get ironed out very quickly, because we will see on Friday and this weekend if it considers themselves bound by the agreement. Is Trump going to be able to get Netanyahu to play ball? Will Netanyahu do that? Is that even in the cards? Will Netanyahu buy Lebanon just to demonstrate that he's not bound by the agreement? And that will tell us very quickly who's lying here. Because I have a very strong feeling that Iran and Pakistan consider that an essential part of the agreement. I'm sure Washington agreed to it, maybe thinking we could get Netanyahu to play ball. I'm also very confident that it does not consider themselves bound by the agreement, and it's not even in their interest for this agreement to succeed. So they actually have an incentive to cause diplomacy to collapse. Additionally, they want to keep fighting in Lebanon. So it's literally a 2-for-1.
It's like such an evil nation when you think about it. It's like, man, the state of Israel is actually like, it's on some diabolical shit, right? Just sabotaging diplomacy at all costs, going to the end of the earth to make sure that there's zero peace in the region. It's devilish. There's no other way to put it. It really is. It's insidious.
They're killing two birds with one stone. They want to keep going to war in Lebanon. They want to create a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, which they will eventually annex. And if that means unraveling diplomacy with Iran and the United States in the process, then that's just a bonus. They just get a twofer. They get a 2-for-1. So this is how all of this is shaping up, is you have all this confusion. It's not looking good. You still have 4 days before this big ceremonial signing on Friday, which doesn't even really make sense in itself. If you have an agreement in text, which you signed yesterday, Why do we need a signing ceremony for it to take effect? Doesn't that just give more time for it to fall apart?
Yeah, like I said, if we have 6 days until JD Vance meets with the Iranians, that's enough time, way more than enough time for Israel to sabotage this peace effort. Way more than enough time.
And moreover, if there's a text that's been signed by both sides, why is there all this confusion? Just release the text of the agreement. Why can't we see it? And again, we're marching towards Friday, and maybe some of these things can be finessed. You know, did we give Iran any money? Honestly, who could really say? Who really would even know? Because American media, Iranian media, I mean, they'll dispute it for the good of their own country. And whether Iran is charging a toll, again, who's really going to know? And the United States could always lie about it anyway. But whether there are strikes in Lebanon, well, that's really up to Israel. And you can't hide that. If Lebanon is being bombed, we're going to know. And it's up to Israel whether Lebanon's getting bombed. And then it's, like I said, very quickly we're going to find out what this agreement really says. Because if Iran and Pakistan are serious about a ceasefire on all fronts, then there goes the deal. Then there's no MOU.
You know how it goes too with it is that all they have to do is go, well, look, one of our soldiers got killed by a Hezbollah drone or a Hezbollah sniper. They don't have to really show proof or anything. They don't have to show a body. They don't, nothing like that. And then that will give Israel, you know, all of the justification that they need to launch an airstrike, and they'll launch 10 airstrikes just, you know, to hammer it home, to be like, oh, you killed one of ours, we'll kill 100 of yours. That kind of thing. This is what Israel does every single time. So no, it's like just false flag attack. If it is a real attack, amplify it and then give yourself an explanation, just bomb everything. If this whole peace agreement just hinges on Israel not dropping bombs on Lebanon, I'm sorry, but it sounds like it's on, you know, shaky ground.
If they believe it's a ceasefire everywhere and Lebanon is getting bombed, then there's no deal. The strait remains closed. We're back to square one. That's one scenario. Another scenario is Lebanon gets bombed and the agreement remains in effect. And then we realize Iran and Pakistan weren't serious and they were just maybe hoping to get something more, but they're not willing to jeopardize the ceasefire. I think that's very unlikely. Maybe your third option is that there's all this theater and Netanyahu has to beat his chest and perform as though he's defying Trump and he's performing for his own domestic political audience. But in the end, he's going to comply and he might reluctantly do it and he might huff and puff. And again, he might go through this posturing and signaling to his own people. But maybe in the end, there might be a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, and he will allow Trump to negotiate with Iran on nuclear. But those are really the three scenarios. Two scenarios are that it violates the deal, and either it collapses or it's maintained, or it abides by the deal, and then we have no problems. But let's talk about a little further how we got to this MOU, because I think this is really important.
Yeah, like basically, like it wants full regime change. They didn't get it, so they're going to keep trying, right?
So you might remember 2-3 weeks ago, it was said that we had an MOU back then, back on Memorial Day weekend, 3 weeks ago. The U.S. and Iran said, we have an agreement, we have an MOU, it's a done deal, all we have to do is sign it. And it was then that Netanyahu said, we're going to intensify our operations in Lebanon. And then the MOU fell apart. And that is when Trump made that phone call to Netanyahu and said, listen, I got you out of jail. You better straighten yourself out. You're going to turn the whole world against it. And he forced into a ceasefire with Hezbollah. Then the following weekend, bombed Beirut, which Iran specifically said would invite a retaliation from Iran. So it bombed Beirut. Iran retaliated against it, bombing them, retaliated against Iran, and there were 3 waves of tit-for-tat strikes before Trump intervened and shut them both down. Following week, it seemed like we had another MOU. Diplomacy was coming back together. Netanyahu said, we're not done in Lebanon. We're going back in. Then you get to this weekend. Netanyahu bombed Beirut again. I want to talk specifically about yesterday. Yesterday, just like a few weeks ago, we had an MOU finished, finalized, done deal, ready to go, just as it was. And just like the week before, bombed Beirut. And just like before, Iran said we must retaliate. We are going to launch missiles at Israel. Why? Because Beirut and Lebanon are off limits. Iran is extending their security umbrella over Hezbollah. That is their ally. They want to deter Israel from bombing Lebanon. And in order to do that, they have to reply to every Israeli attack on Lebanon. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It needs to get the message that any aggression against Lebanon, in particular in Beirut, will be met with a response. So Iran has to launch missiles at Israel. This is yesterday. Trump goes in and begs Iran not to do this. Trump goes to Iran and says, we have an agreement. It's a done deal. We have a ceasefire. Please don't take the bait. Don't retaliate. Iran threatens to pull out of the negotiations. Iran says we must retaliate. We don't abandon our allies. We told Israel, if you bomb Beirut, we will retaliate against you. We simply have to do it. And so it has been reported that in order to bribe Iran to stay in the negotiations, Trump unfroze money up front and offered to unilaterally end our blockade of the strait first before they open the strait on their end.
God, isn't it so crazy how Trump has just burned down his 2016 political movement, burned down the whole Trump MAGA movement, everything with this garbage? Like, America gets literally nothing for any of this. Just a strategic loss. The economy is going to be terrible for years after this. Americans are dead. Humiliating on the world stage. You look at it and you go, really? For all of this? For Netanyahu and for these Israelis? Like, you burned it all. You threw it all away into the dumpster for this. It's wild to look at.
In other words, Trump sweetened the deal. Trump came to Iran and said, all right, we'll give you some cash. That's not enough? Okay, we'll end our blockade of the strait first, and then you can open it later after we're done. And it has been reported that only because of those two concessions did Iran remain in the negotiations and actually sign on to the MOU. So what does this say about this upcoming week? It says that it really has the ability to derail diplomacy, because if the original ceasefire fell apart because there was not a ceasefire on all fronts, in other words, if Iran and Pakistan saw that as a precondition to open the strait, we have reason to believe they feel the same way now as they did back then. If they closed the strait in April because it started bombing Lebanon again, who's to say they won't do it again this week? And same thing, if Iran was going to pull out of negotiations yesterday because it was bombing Lebanon, who's to say that if it starts bombing Lebanon again next week, then Iran doesn't pull out of the deal and reclose the Strait of Hormuz? So this just goes to show the centrality of Lebanon in these negotiations. And what I think is that ultimately Iran does not need a deal. We need a deal. Understand the difference in our two positions. What we need is a very short-term ceasefire because we need economic relief. We are actually desperate to end the conflict because we need the oil to flow. We actually need the oil to go out because our strategic petroleum reserve is just about out. And once that oil stops being pumped, prices are going to go up fast. They're already going up. Inflation is already ticking back up. And this is a big problem for the U.S. economy. So we really need that oil. And that's why, by the way, we're giving all these concessions. We're getting nothing. We're giving everything. We're giving waivers for Iran to sell their oil without the sanctions that have been imposed? Because we need the supply to get back to normal. We're bribing them and paying them to open up the strait, unilaterally ending our blockade because we need the supply to go back to normal. So it is imperative for the United States to get a short-term agreement so we can get that immediate economic relief. We can start to normalize. And it's not to say that we're not going to go back into Iran in the future. We just need a respite. We need to build more interceptors. We need to make them more cheaply. We need to build more drones. We need our military to regroup and recalibrate our strategy. And fundamentally, we just need more oil.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk of that the United States, when it comes to anti-drone warfare, counter-drone measures, that America's just lagging behind, straight up. That America hasn't been paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine as much as she should be. Let's be completely honest about that, right? That is the future of warfare. We have to rekit, retool, do some R&D, and figure out how are we going to counter Shawhead drones like that? How are we going to better counter ballistic missiles? These are questions that do matter ultimately. You know, we've talked about the cost at length of, you know, shooting down a $15,000 drone with a $10 million missile. That's just not economically feasible, you know, so we have to figure these things out.
It's totally the opposite with Iran. Iran is thinking long term. What Iran is principally focused on is reestablishing deterrence. That is the name of the game for them, is the word deterrence. Why? They know Israel and the United States want regime change. They know Israel and the United States fundamentally want to destroy Iran's ability to enrich uranium and to take their stockpile of highly enriched uranium. They know we want to destroy their missiles. And they know that on a long enough timeline, we're going to come back and come back until our mission is accomplished. Because that's what we've been doing. Over time, we've gradually been escalating, and it started with pulling out of the original nuclear deal, and then it was killing Soleimani, and then it was going to war against their proxies, and then it was bombing their nukes last year, and then it's this war this year. And so what Iran principally wants is they want to impose a very high cost on any future hostilities, any transgression against Iran's sovereignty or their airspace, any attacks on Iran, in other words, have to be considered as an all-out war, and an all-out war has to come at a very high cost, such that the U.S. and Israel are not going to even attempt anything in the future. Iran has to make it clear that if Israel and the United States launch any kind of attack, anything resembling hostilities, it's all-out war. Strait is being closed, Gulf countries are being attacked, missiles flying at U.S. bases, and the whole world needs to know a war like that is going to be very costly for everybody, so people should just steer clear. So Iran has said, look, we don't actually want to normalize relations. We don't want to integrate. We don't actually necessarily even need a treaty. We're not interested in that. What they are interested in is making sure that in the long term, the U.S. and Israel will not mess with Iran. And a treaty does not guarantee that. Because treaties get ripped up and violated all the time. Iran doesn't trust the United States. Iran doesn't trust Trump. Iran doesn't trust Israel. And so we could have MOUs and treaties and agreements and everything. Trump pulled out of the JCPOA. We violate ceasefires and agreements all the time. So does Israel. Iran is not interested in that. And Iran actually doesn't need any short-term relief. They just got bombed 15,000 times. Their supreme leader got killed. Their navy got sunk. They're sort of in this, okay? They're in it to win it at this point. And they're not going to come to the table and make some paltry agreement so they could get $12 billion. What they are fighting for is to make sure that the U.S. and Israel are deterred from ever considering meddling in Iran's affairs in the future. They want the U.S. to leave the Middle East. They want the U.S. and the Gulf countries never to consider a revolution in Iran through the intelligence agencies, never to consider another decapitation strike.
Yeah, you've simply run out of options, right? Like, what do? You can't foment another revolution. You can't bomb them, another 15,000 plus times. That doesn't really have any effect. They're just going to hit you from concealed placements on the shoreline with drones, with anti-ship missiles, with radar installations that are concealed. It's a nightmare in war at the end of the day. It's a military scenario which is just ultimately unwinnable. All right, you would have to essentially do one of the greatest military ground operations in the history of mankind. All right, that's what like winning this war and going to Tehran and getting their nuclear material and taking it out. That's what that would have to mean. Like, why would Iran willingly give up any of their nuclear material? Like, these are the things when we hammer home about, we go, yeah, you know, it seems like war actually isn't that unlikely in the future.
Ever consider airstrikes on Iran's nuclear complex? They want to make it clear that Iran's airspace, its territory, war is off limits. It's too costly. So once we understand this, you realize it is the United States which needs a deal. Iran doesn't. Now, why might Iran make Lebanon the center of everything? Because what this does is it creates division in our coalition. Once you understand that it is driving everything in the region, why are we at war? Why is the United States bombing Iran? It's because it wants regime change in Iran. That's why Iran needs nukes. And nukes are why the United States ever got involved in the first place. It is October 7th, which became Israel's pretext that they rolled into a conflict in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, ultimately in Iran. This is why we are where we are in the first place. Once you understand Israel's central role, you realize that Iran will never truly be safe. They will never deter U.S. and Israeli aggression until they isolate it from the U.S. and the Gulf countries. And so you wonder, maybe this is the strategy. If Iran conditions a short-term ceasefire on a ceasefire in Lebanon, then what this does is it puts Trump in a position where he has to force Israel to do something against their interest, which it is never going to do. And if it disobeys and defies the United States, it means that it is no longer Iran, which is inflicting the economic pain on the United States. It's actually Israel.
Yeah, and it really goes from here as to what Trump's reaction to the Israelis is going to be. Ultimately, we're seeing the Israeli reaction in real time to all about this. They're absolutely livid. I mean, Mark Levin on Twitter, he's such a creature. He's just, cursing. He's saying this is a betrayal. How could you do this to us? It's just completely like flabbergasting how these people like look at it. It's like, dude, you call yourself an American? Excuse me, you sound like an Israeli, dude. You should go live there, all right? Full time.
We are being hurt because of these high oil prices. If the war starts up again because the peace process unravels, it is us that has to spend the money to keep the carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea. It's us that has to make the Patriot missile batteries and the THAAD systems. We have to shoot down the missiles. It's us that is diverted from our other agenda in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, in Europe. And pretty soon we're going to stop blaming Iran, because Iran wants to make a deal, and we're going to start blaming our closest ally. Because we're saying, look, we're fighting your war. We're fighting the Gulf countries' war at a very steep political, economic, and military cost. It didn't work out. There are no more military options. The Republican administration might not survive this. The U.S. economy might not survive this. So we need to get out of this. Are you now telling us you won't let us extricate ourselves from this detrimental war that we're fighting on your behalf?
I mean, evil rogue nation, bro. It's like these people are rotten to the core. They think that you're going to tell America, no, you can't leave this war because we need you to fight it. Excuse me?
Because you insist on fighting the separate war on your own terms? Pretty soon, it puts and the United States at odds because it puts our self-interest in contradiction with theirs. We need to get out, but the only way to get out is for Israel to stop their war in Lebanon, but they need to fight their war in Lebanon and against Iran at any cost. So now it creates enmity between Israel and the United States, and in particular between Netanyahu and Trump. And you can see this playing out in real time, where this previously rock-solid relationship, where Netanyahu visits the White House 7 times in 1 year, and we're authorizing a new MOU on Israeli foreign aid, and we have this National Defense Authorization Act provision where we're bringing our intelligence and military operations together under one roof. Now, all of a sudden, Trump and Netanyahu are fighting in public in the press every day. You almost wonder if the goal of making Lebanon the poison pill in the agreement is to create animosity between the U.S. and Israel. And I would say between Israel then and the Gulf countries. Because let's entertain the scenario where Friday arrives. You have your big signing ceremony with all the pomp and circumstance, and it's a big deal, and the strait is open and the blockade ends, and we enter negotiations with Iran. Let's say that it engages in Lebanon, and they almost have to, because it will say, we are not bound by outside agreements that we're not a party to. Moreover, we reserve the right to defend ourselves. It's our periphery. It's our northern frontier. It's our northern border. And so they might do a symbolic strike just to demonstrate we have freedom of operation in this theater. It's our border. It's our enemy. It's our northern communities that are under attack by Hezbollah rocket fire. So actually, we reserve the right to bomb them at any time. That in and of itself is self-defense. Now, let's say they do that. Let's say Iran and Pakistan say the deal is off and Iran reimposes the closure of the strait. Well, then it's effectively Israel's fault that we don't have diplomacy. Now, it's not to say that we never get an agreement out of Iran, but it does mean that once again, the deal falls apart and maybe it's another 2 weeks.
I mean, this is exceptionally public, too, that people are going to look at this, and I think the American people widely will look at this and go like, hey, like I thought God Emperor Trump said this was over. Like, why isn't it over? And the talking heads aren't really going to have a decent answer. It's going to be, well, bombed Lebanon. We told them not to. And this is something that, I mean, I guess it can kind of, work to our favor politically over here as driving a wedge between, Israel and the administration. Ultimately, that is probably a good thing in the long run. Like, we should be decoupling from Israel, or at least telling them what the hell to do.
Maybe it's another month. Maybe it's another 60 days. However much longer it goes on, and whatever it costs us, the responsibility of that falls on the shoulders of Netanyahu and Israel, just like it did in April. And so I'm almost starting to suspect, and I said it even back then, is this a poison pill by the Iranians? Because they know it will never stop in Lebanon. And so if they make it stopping a precondition to an agreement, they've effectively foreclosed on the possibility there'll ever be a ceasefire. But when you realize that they don't need one as bad as we do, then you realize maybe that's by design. Maybe they're intentionally sabotaging the agreement so that it's scapegoated and isolated from the United States. And if that happens, if you have a contentious relationship between the U.S. and Israel, that may be the ultimate guarantor of Iran's long-term security.
I mean, if we're beefing with it, let's be real. If America is beefing with it, then they're probably not going to go to war on Israel's behalf, right? I mean, it's Iran's logic, essentially, right?
Again, as we've said over and over and over again throughout the conflict, the United States actually does not have some great strategic imperative in toppling the Iranian government. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. What we want is stability in the Middle East. We want balance. We want stability. We don't want Iran to become a failed state. And the prospect of a regime change is just not feasible. It would involve ground operations, the biggest special forces raid in history. Who even knows if it's possible at all?
Yeah, I talked about this about a week ago, but it does bring into the, like, you enter the realm of the question of, do we basically run up against a wall of the capability of the US military? And that's real life. Like, can the US military actually pull off a mission like that? Now, I would like to have confidence, but it's such a grand operation. It'd be one of the biggest wars of all time. Let's be real. That you seriously doubt, especially after seeing Russia with Ukraine, you seriously doubt whether or not something like that is even possible.
So toppling Iran's government is not really something that is even an imperative for us. Maybe it's on the wish list, but it's not an imperative. What we need is a reasonable assurance that they will not pursue a nuclear bomb. You can achieve that without toppling the government. On the other hand, in contradistinction, it's the opposite. They want to topple Iran's government. That is why Iran has this nuclear threshold status. That nuclear threshold status is a justification for it to attack Iran and bring the United States into the conflict. So once you understand this, you realize this triangulation. Iran doesn't need a deal. We do. Needs to fight this war in Lebanon. That makes it impossible for us to have a deal. We blame it for not having a deal. It isolates it from us as the country that wants to destroy Iran. We don't. But it can't destroy Iran without us. So separating it from the United States is the only way that Iran gets their long-term interest, which is deterring a coalition war against them to topple their government. That might be the way to solve the puzzle for them. So all of this is theoretical. I just want to clarify this. This is just a disclaimer. Everything that I'm saying right now is speculative. What is so difficult about analyzing the situation is we really have no idea who is telling the truth here.
Yeah, we have a supreme lack of facts and data points coming out of all of the media right now surrounding this. And exactly Nick's point, it just makes it so much more difficult to figure out what this is going to look like in about a week or two from now, or 60 days. Unfortunately, it's like a vacuum. It's like a black hole of information at the moment. If, we would love to have all of the data points possible, but no one's giving them out, it seems.
Because there's discrepancies between all three sides. There's discrepancies within this deal, and one side is lying. Iran is saying certain things that are mutually exclusive with what we are saying. We are saying they're not going to control the strait. They're saying they are. They are saying Lebanon is part of the ceasefire. We are saying it isn't. So somebody's telling the truth and somebody isn't. Now, you could say Iran is pandering to their own people. You could say we are pandering to our people. We're both engaged in some degree of face saving. Then you bring in Israel. You have this apparent feud between Trump and Netanyahu about whether Netanyahu will stop bombing Lebanon. Is that even real? Or is that in itself a form of signaling and posturing? Do Trump and Netanyahu really have a difference of opinion? Or is this a good cop, bad cop routine? Is it that Israel is attacking Iran as an extension of us, and then we don't get blamed for it because we say that we're estranged from them? Well, if it attacks Iran, hey, we had nothing to do with that. We told them not to. So to what extent is that even real? Is Trump really calling up Netanyahu and Matt on the phone? Or is that something they're planting in the press to convey to the Iranians so that we can be the good cop and it can be the wild card, bulldog, attack dog that we might let off the leash?
It is certainly plausible, but it's also, I feel like it's equally plausible that Trump wants an out of this. Like we were just discussing, the price of oil was about to get a major shock just from the oil reserves running out, and then Russia's energy going completely offline for a little while because it's just relentless Ukrainian strikes. That it's hard to figure out which one it is.
Iran has to worry about. So you don't even know what the relationship is between it and the United States, because just like Iran has to pander to its population, and just like Trump is looking to save face, Netanyahu, too, is facing elections in October, and he needs to project strength as well. He needs to equally keep Trump happy, but he also has to project strength within the Knesset and within Israel, that he's doing a good job fighting Hezbollah, fighting Iran, that all these years of war and getting it to be isolated were worth it, that he's actually achieving anything meaningful strategically in the region. So that's what makes it very difficult to say, because there's just so many variables. You just don't really know who is telling the truth. And so that's why it's going to be very interesting to see this weekend. You're going to have the signing ceremony. Who knows if we even get there? This is what we have to look for. These are some questions we have to ask ourselves. One, when do we see the agreement? Because like I said, we might see it tomorrow. We might see it Wednesday. We might not see it until Saturday.
I think it's incredibly suspect that we haven't seen the deal from either side, right? Iran hasn't showed it. America hasn't showed it. Why can't we see the text of the deal? I think it's incredibly suspicious that we just have no information. It's like a vacuum.
Why? Very weird, because apparently it has already been signed, and yet they're hiding it. So why hide it away? We need to see the agreement. We don't even know when that's going to happen. Two, do we even make it to the signing ceremony? If already there's these discrepancies between Washington and Tehran, and Netanyahu is publicly saying, I'm going to violate the deal, do we even get to Friday? Let's say we get to Friday, we see the text of the deal. Will be very interesting to see what's in it. Then it's a question whether it will be constrained by it. And if they violate the deal, if they go against the ceasefire that has been imposed on them by the agreement, what happens then? Does Iran close the strait? I think they do. And then what does the United States do? Are we bombing them again? These are the questions we have to ask. It's going to be a very interesting week. So we'll be looking tomorrow and Wednesday if we see the agreement. Friday, we'll be looking to see if they sign it. All throughout the week, we'll be watching Lebanon very closely and seeing if they're going to get hit by